I was at a dinner last night with a bunch of Niner fans and Bay Area sports fans, and a lady came up to me and she's like, "I'm so big on the draft," and I was like, "Wow, I'm shocked." She didn't seem like a draftnik to me, but she's like, "If you had to bet everything you had on who the 49ers would take, who do you think it would be?" And I'm like, "That's a damn good question." I go, I'm going to ask that to Chase Senior tomorrow morning. That's a good one because it's like, you kind of cuts through all positions and just kind of goes with the most likely guy. I said to her that if I kind of always believe that the Niners always come back to the D line, but there's such a need for offensive line. And when Kyle Shanahan spoke recently, he said, yeah, we signed Colt McKivitz. We love him, this and that, but we're going to continue looking or continue shopping or whatever. And it just reeked of, we got this guy signed, but now we're going to go find a big time tackle if we can. So I would probably say Tyler Guyton. And that's what I told her. I said, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, just because he played right tackle at Oklahoma. I think there's potential in 2 or 3 years to switch over to left tackle, but he could be a plug and play right tackle if they, he's a true destroyer in the run game at 6'8", 325 or whatever he is. I said Tyler Guyton. What do you think? But, then I thought about it. I'm like, well, I probably should have gone with a defensive lineman of some kind. And if I was going defensive line, I might go somebody like Braden Fisk or Michael Hall, but I went with Guyton. If I asked you that question, who is, you got to bet everything you own on the Niners drafting one player at 31. Who would be the guy?
Yeah, I like Tyler Guyton, and I think that Oklahoma connection with Trent Williams might help him early in his career because Trent Williams is very familiar with the player. We know that Williams is getting a little bit older, but the opportunity to take a young player under his wing when he knows the importance of developing offensive line and in particular that position for San Francisco, I think that could make a lot of sense. Amarius Mims is a player, like I said, with all of the physical upside that you want for a tackle who could be a perennial Pro Bowler. And when you look at what he did against Ohio State in the college football playoff 2 years ago, you're like, oh my goodness. But the valid question is, on a loaded Georgia team, if we're talking about him as a first-round pick, why did he only have 8 starts throughout his college career?
Right.
How steep is the learning curve going to be for a player like that? If you want a player who's a lot more experienced, Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU has played a lot at BYU. He's a good scheme fit, light feet, can get out in space. He's played a ton. And when you mention defensive tackles, Jerzon Newton could be there out of Illinois. He's a really solid player, hasn't been able to test or do anything in the pre-draft process because of injury. Braden Fisk, measurables were unbelievable at the NFL scouting combine. And at edge rusher and defensive tackle, you really have no young developmental pieces outside of Drake Jackson, who up to this point has been a bust. And I think defensive tackle, defensive end could be in play for San Francisco. Could they trade up for a player like Chop Robinson? If Laitu Latu at a UCLA drops a little bit, either to 31 or he's there in the mid-20s, do the Niners try to move up for a player like that? Do they go defensive tackle? Because you addressed it with Malik Collins, who's been more productive and more available than Eric Armstead, but you have Malik Collins, 28. You have Javon Hargrave in his early 30s. You brought back Kevin Gibbons. You have Kalia Davis, but he's been injured, including his last year at UCF when he tore his ACL. Defensive tackle, defensive end, you need to replenish those roster spots a little bit. And I think those, in addition to offensive linemen, could be in play for the Niners in the first round too.
You had a beautiful pronunciation of the BYU offensive lineman's last name. I've been butchering it. I've been calling him Kingsley Suamataia.
Kingsley Suamataia.
Suamataia. Okay, there you go.
I'm 95% sure that's right. But
no, there's a lot
of offensive linemen who have very confusing names in this draft. You have Troy Fatanu, you have Thales Fuaga, you have Kingsley Suamataia, Karan Amagaji. I mean, my goodness, it's a
I know.
mouthful. A lot of
Yeah,
syllables.
seriously. A lot of syllables. Did you get what were the combine actual measurements on the BYU kid? Because I've saw him listed at 285. I've seen him listed at 325. That's a 40-pound difference. And I'll tell you, he whatever weight he is at, he looks really comfortable at that weight. He doesn't look pumped up. He looks like his frame could add more weight. I mean, there's a lot of people that feel like this guy's a mauler in the run game and maybe could start right away at right tackle. What were his final measurements? And because to me, that when you look like you're 280 but you're really 325, that's a great sign. That means that you're kind of a natural at that weight. You don't have to lift weights to get to 325 or do all kinds of off-season work. He looks comfortable at whatever weight he was at.
Yeah, I always look at these relative athletic scores, and basically they grade these athletes on an athletic testing scale of 0 to 10. So 10 obviously being elite. So Kingsley Suamataia had an RAS score of 9.35. That's obviously really good out of 10. He's 6'4", 326 pounds. He had 31 reps of 225 on the bench press. So we were talking about AJ Simon with those 35 reps. Kingsley Suamataia had 31 reps, 34 and a quarter inch arms, which are solid. He had a 28-inch vertical, which sometimes can gauge short area quickness and explosiveness. Really good broad jump of 9 feet. He ran a 5.04 40-yard dash at 326 pounds. And I want people to put that into context, right? Because Xavier Worthy set the NFL Combine record with the 4.21 40-yard dash at like 165 pounds. So Suamataia is running a 5.04 at 326 pounds. So obviously a lot heavier than a player like Kingsley Suamataia, or a lot lighter. And Suamataia obviously heavier than a player like Xavier Worthy. But in this scheme for Kyle Shanahan, outside zone, we see Trent Williams with those pancake blocks. They make highlight reels all the time when he climbs to that second and third level, him pancaking DBs and linebackers and safeties. And it's always so fun to watch a player who's 330 pounds pancaking a 200-pounder downfield to open up some holes for some of the fellow runners, whether it be Debo, Aiyuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, others. Suamataia moves really well for his size, and he's kind of played in a zone scheme for BYU, and that's why he could be a little bit of a scheme fit. And you don't have to worry about the lack of experience if you want him to be a plug-and-play guy, which then, if he does play from the jump, that puts Colton McKivitz in a spot where I prefer him to be. I think he's a swing tackle. He can play a little bit on the interior. I just don't think he's good enough to be a starter in this league.